Hey everyone, welcome back to the Questioning Behaviour podcast. As always, you're here with me and you're also here with Sarah, my much better half.
You're the dummy that don't believe in science. All your projects always be denying.
And at the same time, we are here with a new guest, hardly a surprise given, if you've listened to this podcast before, and we're here today with Victoria. Now, Victoria, would you please tell the crowd, who are you, what do you do, and how did you get there?
Sure. So my name is Victoria. I'm from Spain, and I've been interested in behavioral economics since 2010 when I read Nudge.
Fair enough.
And since that book, I had courses in behavioral economics in the US. I did a master's in neuroscience and economics, decided to go into the adventure of a PhD. Not sure if it was a good idea or not. Definitely, likely yes, but
okay.
And then after that, I started to work in the industry, first as an economist, and now I'm going to start the job as a full behavioral economist at Allianz.
Okay, cool stuff. Now, to backtrack this a bit so we can get a good overview, you said you got interested in behavioral economics as early as 2010. When in 2010, were you in undergrad? Were you much younger? How was this development?
So I was in undergrad. I was doing a bachelor in economics. And I was actually thinking about dropping the economics field altogether because I just was not understanding anything. Like, what on earth is a sunk cost, right? Or what other questions I had, like the opportunity cost of something. I was like, who thinks about those things, right? And it felt so unintuitive that I was thinking this is not for me. And my background, at school, I really like biology, and it was so intuitive that I was like, I need to change to biology because that's what felt good for me. And at that point, my mom was like, think about it. And she started gifting me books in different areas of economics. And that's how I ended up reading Nudge. And at that time, I was actually thinking about doing an exchange in the US. And they were offering behavioral economics courses in the US, not in Spain, but in the US, they were offering them. And I was like, okay, I'll continue for an additional year. I'll take this course that seems like more related to biology or at least psychology. Sure. And actually I didn't stop doing economics. I continued to do a PhD in economics even. So.
Okay. But you've mentioned that you've also had a stint, not to be derogatory about it, in neuroeconomics essentially, or neuroscience and economics. So how did you come across that?
Well, again, this comes back to this biology, I think if I had to study again, I would do biology, honestly. And neuroscience is more related to biology than economics.
So this was your master's degree?
Yeah, exactly.
Which you did where?
In Maastricht. They were doing...
That I know. Maastricht represent.
I was actually the first cohort of that master.
Nice. Very nice.
Yeah. And I remember that I actually did first a master's in behavioral economics, a one-year master's in Maastricht. And we had to read many papers on experimental economics. And we started reading some neuroeconomics papers from Paul Gilcher, also Ernst Berg. He had some neuroeconomics papers, and Antonio Rangel as well. So I thought, hey, this sounds pretty cool. And I decided to do this 2-year master's in neuroeconomics. And
nice. So I know so I see you've found your niche. You found a way to make economics interesting and bring in your love of biology and the sort of intuition behind behavioral science sort of appealed to you. So you sort of mentioned at the beginning of your intro questioning whether or not doing a PhD was the right decision in the end. So how did you come to studying for the PhD? How did you get into it in the first place?
I think there's 2 reasons for that. Bad experience in the private sector as an intern. I worked in a private bank, and I got extremely bored. And I was supposed to be there for 6 months, and I made enough money to buy a camera, and I quit, and I took the camera to India and decided that was not for me, basically.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I had to, after my master's, I had to decide what to do. And given my bad industry experience, I was like, okay, so maybe I should try a PhD. And I'm really enjoying reading these academic papers. And I think that's what a PhD means, right? Is to read academic papers and write them. So it seems like a good fit. So that was the reason I ended up in a PhD.
Okay. You know what? Fair enough. Quite a chill motivation, I'd argue. Not the worst I've heard by a long shot. So, yeah, no, a fair motivation. If you don't think private is for you, there's no real reason to go back into industry, and then the PhD is a pretty decent option. So, how was your PhD application process? How many programs did you apply for? Where did you eventually end up? Were you happy with where you ended up?
So I actually, for me was, if I was going to do a PhD, it had to be in a topic that I really enjoyed.
Mm-hmm.
And the topic was really specific. It was principal agent theory, so motivation, employee motivation,
Mm-hmm.
and related to behavioral economics. And at that time, 2014, there were not so many people doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And we were the first cohort of this master, and the coordinator was really making sure that we ended up in a good place. So he put us in contact with different people who were looking for PhDs in economics, behavioral economics. They were looking for PhD candidates, and with a background in behavioral economics, neuroscience, and things like that. And that's where I met my thesis advisor. And I applied to his opening. I did not apply to a university, basically. So It was kind of an easy way into the PhD world. I didn't have to compete with 1,000 people in the end. And I ended up in Switzerland. So I think it's a little bit different there, the PhD world, compared to other places. It's more like the Netherlands. They consider you an employee.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. Yeah, I've seen this for Switzerland. I know this for the Netherlands because obviously I'm Dutch. But yeah, you have a wage and you have the holiday days that you need to spend every year because otherwise you will have an angry administrator chasing you down the hallway. And it's system wise. I think it sets much clearer boundaries to be treated as an employee, to have a job, albeit one with a very clear, deadline. Although loads of people are on fixed term contracts, so it's not really novel in that regard. So what was your experience like in the PhD? Were there specific aspects you really, really enjoyed? Were there specific aspects that you didn't really see coming? Maybe even negative experiences? Just very broad question, but in general, tell us about your PhD experience.
Okay. So, as I said, I did my PhD in Switzerland, which is a little bit different to other places because you're considered an employee. And they also have they have centralized the PhD in economics. So all of the PhD in economics in the country, of the different universities in Switzerland, they study the same courses in Bern. So this was really good because you created a community. So you met all of the PhD students in Switzerland of your same cohort. So that was pretty cool. Like you had this thing in common with everyone else. And it was nice to have these courses. Everyone was in the same level. And that was the starting point of the PhD. Like after the courses, everything is different, right? Nothing is planned anymore. Like it's open. And I didn't know about this. Like it's so uncertain. You don't know where you're going. When you start something, you don't know if it's going anywhere either, right? So I was not really expecting this huge uncertainty that you are involved whilst in a PhD. And so I also had frustrations that I had not expected. It's not only the uncertainty of the things that you're doing now, but also about what are you going to do afterwards. Mm-hmm. So you are never able to really choose where you're going to live, right? It depends on the positions that come out. Yes. If they want you for those positions, if your background actually matches what you're looking for, which is sometimes not the case, right? Mm-hmm. So this constant uncertainty throughout your entire career until you become a professor, and then you don't even choose where you're going to live. It again depends on what position is open. So that was something I was not expecting. Mm-hmm. At all for my PhD. Another source of frustration that I was not expecting is suddenly you're doing the PhD and this is everything that you have, and suddenly it's your world, right? And your entire identity is tied to a PhD. And actually, when they ask you, what is it that you're doing? You say, I'm a PhD student, right? So your identity is totally tied to what you're doing, which happens in many other words, right? In other areas. But I guess it's really different because this is something that you own. It's like your project. So it's something, it's really personal somehow. So, and the personal and the professional really get mixed together. And it was, for me, I think the decisive moment when my perspective changed in the PhD was when I decided to take a step backwards and separate my identity from the PhD. So I was not a PhD student, I was doing a PhD, right? And I was much more than just a PhD student. Yeah. And that meant that at that time, like when you're doing a PhD, there's like ups and downs constant, right? Like sometimes you're in the top of the hill, you're just great, everything is going perfectly. But many times you're like in the bottom of the valley, like suffering. And if you think you're your PhD, then in those lows, like your whole identity crumbles down, right? So the decisive moment for me was when I decided to take that step backwards and think of, okay, so what is it that I am beside the PhD? And I had to explore much more like my hobbies and make sure that I nurtured them and make sure that I understood that they were as important as my PhD. So that whenever I was low in the PhD, at least I was high somewhere else and I could just compensate. And I think that was the biggest learning I got from the PhD. And it's something that I still now practice. Like I really make sure to have other things. And I also have like goals in those other things, right? Like to make sure that I'm at least progressing in other areas and yeah.
Yeah. It's really wise. I mean, Mela and I are both PhD students right now, so really resonates with us.
We do a PhD. Both of us are doing a PhD.
See, it's so natural to tie it to your identity. You're so right. So I'm interested about, your experience actually in academia. Did you enjoy the sort of the academic work of the PhD? Yeah. What do you think of it?
I mean, I would also like to hear about your experience. I did enjoy it, but sometimes I feel like there's a lot of secretism around the PhD world, like the academic world, right? It's not really easy that you have to do to get somewhere. And like, I didn't know this, but it really depends on connections, much more than what I thought. And talking to the right person at the right moment and things like that. And I really liked having this thing that you really explored in depth and you created knowledge, right? That was like oh wow, I cannot look for this in Wikipedia because no one is actually doing this. And that part was extremely exciting. But at the same time, some like this secretism, like the shadows in the academic world, like made me uncomfortable. Also, in the end, I did PhD in economics, and it was like a really manly field. And there were many dinners that I was the only woman, and that sometimes felt a bit like, what's going on here? I don't know if you want to share also your experience about that. Like, what is it that you enjoy about doing a PhD?
Yeah, good question. Melly, you go first.
You asshole. I went through the same experience that you did, Victoria, where I had a very different image of what the PhD would be and what the world of academia would be, which was based on an image, but I'm not entirely sure where I found it and how it got cultivated. But so when I did the master's in behavioral and economic science at Warwick. Loved it, absolutely loved it. Thought it was amazing. And then I did apply to the private sector. I hated the entire process. I hated the applications. I hated the interviews. There was nothing positive going on there. So I was like, this is clearly not for me. Not entirely sure I should have dropped an entire sector after like 6 interviews, but hindsight. So I decided to move into a PhD. What a PhD is signaling that it is and what a PhD actually is are two very, very different things, which you only know after you've gone through it. And as a result of that, I think the mismatch between my expectations and my reality is so different that I find it very difficult. I'm just bearing all here. I find it very difficult to actually identify what I enjoyed about the PhD. I do actually enjoy research.
Oh, God.
Yeah, Sarah, come on, back me up here. I really do thoroughly enjoy doing research, but not in this way. I have a lot of issues with the 600 different, very much hidden hoops that you have to jump through in the academic world, and no one tells you about it. And it is it is a rude awakening once you realize that to get from a good idea to a workable concept to an actual study to an actual publication is a nightmare. And that is for me also the reason why I am moving into industry. But I feel like we're now making this about ourselves. I mean, Sarah, please answer the question. Sarah's answer is very likely going to be more positive. But we should talk about going into industry soon.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't think I had any expectations of what the PhD was going to be, because I had no idea what a PhD was when I applied. I sort of thought you do a project, you work at the university, you read a lot of stuff about a very niche, you become like an expert in a niche. I thought that's what it was. And then to get into it, I think what I've enjoyed is learning like the methods. I love applying the methods. I love designing experiments. I like running data analysis. But what I don't really like is the whole process in aggregate. I would love just be able to specialize in, doing a lit review for like a project or running an experiment for a project, but not do the whole thing that takes years and years and years and then try and get something published.
Sarah will make for an excellent consultant. Sarah will be the best consultant, honestly. She is ready.
Maybe that's what I'm learning.
And that in and of itself is also worth something, I'd argue. So, Victoria, what was the moment for you in your PhD that you did realize that you didn't want to be an academic and that you wanted to go back into industry despite your initial not so great experience?
I think it was the moment so I had applied for a job like 8 months before finishing my PhD, and I already had the position. And I was like a bit scared about telling my thesis advisor, like, hey, I'm leaving.
Bye.
I told him, and he was shocked. And I think some days after, I don't remember how many days after passed by, he told me, like, I think it's actually the right decision for you. And he said that the reason was that he thought that I needed much more practical application of what I was doing, and seeing some impact on the things that I was doing. And that's partly why I also like teaching, because you definitely see the impact in the teaching part of the PhD.
Right.
Yeah, and that was when he said, like, we had like a close relationship after 5 years, right? And when he said that, I was like, okay, I think I made the right choice to leave academia. And that's how I ended up in the consulting world, basically.
Yeah. But so then I'm curious, because we have to backtrack this, because I'm always very, very interested in motivations, although I'll be quite frank, none of my PhD research is remotely related to motivations. But what did you do in your PhD? Well, I mean, we know that you look at principal agent theories, but how is that applied, and why was your motivation for applying that rather than studying it so much greater?
Honestly, I haven't applied the theories that we developed during the PhD.
Okay, fair enough.
More what Sarah is saying. I applied more the methodology that I learned. So it's actually much better, because it means that you can apply it to so many more things, right?
Yeah, no, fair enough.
Yeah.
So it's like the way of thinking that you're bringing to the industry that is important.
Right.
Like,
makes perfect sense. So a misconception on my part. But to still get back to this, so obviously once you got the position about 8 months-ish before you finished the PhD, I mean, congratulations, that's pretty damn awesome to get something that early in advance. But what made you even seek out these types of job openings? What made you look at them? What made you apply to them? Because that means that even like months before, it was only 8 months till you finish your PhD. I'm getting there, I promise. That you must have had this feeling of like, I don't think this is for me anymore. I have no desire to apply to a postdoc or an assistant professorship or whatever. What was that telltale moment for you? Or was it just an accumulation of different factors where after a while you just hit a limit where you're like, I don't think this is going to be it?
This is the latter. Like, it was an accumulation of factors. And then I did this principal agent theory. So it was like organizational culture. So in some sense, I wanted to put into practice like the ideas that I had read so many times, right? And I wanted to understand what is an organizational culture. So that was also something like that drove me a little bit faster into the decision of changing into the industry. But it was definitely an accumulation of like frustration, fatigue, I guess, as well, and interest on the other side.
Right.
And did you tell your supervisor you were looking at sort of job options outside of academia, or was it the first time you told him about that was when you'd got the job?
No, I first got the job.
Fair enough.
Okay.
But then I regretted not saying it before, because I think he could have helped me and with like, what is it that I wanted to do afterwards. So, I mean, I told him, I think after the second interview or something like that.
Okay, so you were in the process, but nothing had been confirmed yet. Okay, fair enough. How was his? By the way, we are assuming this is a man. This is a man, right? Right. Yeah. Okay, just checking. So
we're in economics. We can assume.
Yeah. No, fair enough. I can just envision your supervisor, and I don't even know them. But what did you think that their initial reaction wouldn't be positive? Is that why you kept it away from him?
Yes, I guess. I have a friend who did a PhD in maths, and he finished before me, and he went also to the industry. And we always talk about the academic mafia. Once you're out of that mafia, you can't get in so easily, right? So
sure.
He actually got in afterwards, and he actually went to the industry. Then he did a postdoc, and then he went back to the industry, and now he got a professorship. So he actually made the entry twice into the mafia. And yeah, I think I was influenced by those conversations I was having with him at that time. And I was a little bit scared of how would it be interpreted, my decision. So
yeah, no, fair enough. And how was it interpreted in the end?
Much better than what I thought. So
well, this is good. Yeah. This is good. So, I mean, there is the stereotype that, especially if you're still in a critical part of the PhD, which, I mean, towards the end, everything is critical, unfortunately, that as soon as you tell your supervisor, like, hey, I have no interest in this academic rigmarole, I'm dropping out. Well, not dropping out, because it's not like you're leaving a PhD, but like I'm moving into industry, and I currently have no interest in pursuing anything further in academia. I think there is always the fear of the fact that your supervisor is going to look at you, realize that there is no real academic advantage to further be gained out of you, because people that want to get out of the PhD, they lose motivation for publishing quite quickly, because what is the point in still pursuing a paper for another 3 years? Like if you're a consultant, you know, it has not that much value as a lot of people think. So they do experience backlash, or at least reduced effort on the part of the PhD supervisor, maybe negative reactions, maybe even the god-awful stereotype that keeps getting propagated that I am sincerely against, that as the only people that go into industry are the ones that can't hack it in academia. So like the academic leftovers go into industry. Yeah, there's loads of reasons to be slightly concerned, and a lot of these reasons academia has propagated for years. So academia can blame themselves for this nonsense. Not that it ever takes any accountability. So we'll just move on from that. But yeah, so you I think, you know, from what I've just heard, you've had a relatively well, I don't want to say easy because that seems to undercut the effort that you've put in, but you've had a relatively smooth transition into industry, would you say?
Yes, I guess.
You're allowed to say no. It was a leading question.
I was having many personal issues at the site, so the relative importance of the PhD really fell down at that time because we were losing family members.
Oh, I'm very sorry.
So yeah, when that comes in, like everything else just feels like unimportant, right? And I think that made me come into a perspective, like towards the end of the PhD, I just relativized everything and it made it easier. That's it. And maybe that's why when I talk about it, it feels like easy. It feels like it was easy for me, but because on the other side, it was quite difficult. I handed in my PhD for the private defense with so many typos that, I mean, at some point I thought I was not going to pass the private defense. And I think my thesis advisor actually had to push a little bit for the typos and explain the situation. So between the private defense and the public defense, I had to do a lot of work to compensate like the typos, basically.
Okay, so this is quite interesting because in the UK system, I don't think there is such a thing as a private or a public defense. We just have a viva, so which is I would argue it's going to be more similar to the private defense. Would you be able to tell us what the distinction is between these two?
Yeah, sure. So the private defense is the tough part, basically. It's where you hand in the thesis like a couple of weeks in advance, I think it is. The committee reads the thesis. So in my case, I had 3 people. Mm-hmm. So an internal one, my thesis director, that doesn't count. So, and 2 external ones. Okay. So, and they read the thesis, and then the day of the defense comes. I think it's 2 hours of defense. And you have a presentation just to refresh the memory of everyone, like 10 minutes, like really short, to the point. Oh. And then they start asking questions. And it's like a private, so it's only the committee. So the 3 people plus the thesis advisor. And then they kick you out of the room. Oh. They talk for 30 minutes or maybe a little bit more. And I remember that the room was like a glass room, so I could see them like making gestures. I was like, "Oh, what's going on there?"
Oh, that is unfortunate. I would have just gone for like a cup of coffee or something, anything else.
Yeah, I went for a walk, but then they would come out to look for you, so you had to be there at some point.
I just leave my number on a post-it somewhere, like when done, call me.
Having a panic attack, come to the toilet if you need me.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. That's me.
Yeah, you can find me crying in the corner. Yeah, no. Anyway.
And then they give you reviews. So you can have a minor reviews phase, a major reviews phase, or a fail, I think.
Yeah.
And like it depending, and they give you, I think it was 2 months to fix everything. They reread everything, or they reread the edits. So the edits is basically the question that they had, and what did you do to address the question? A little bit like if you were sending a paper for publishing.
Yeah, it sounds like an R&R.
Yeah, exactly. And after those 2 months, you send them the final edits, and if they're okay, you just have the public defense. And the public defense is more like a ceremonial. Basically, your parents can come, your family, the PhD fellows, anyone can come, and it's more like a celebration. And then they give you the title, whether you get the summa cum laude or not, or just, hey, congratulations, you made it all the way.
I see. But you'd have to give another presentation.
Yes, but it's made for the family. So that was actually quite fun.
Yeah, that sounds much nicer.
Oh, nice.
I will write an open letter to the Warwick Business School indicating that I would like a public defense.
I mean, it was really fun because in the end, what I did, it was try to explain what's an experiment in the economic world to my family. And they're all like scientists from the science, biology, medicine type of side. So it was like, hey, this is a room, you have computers, and people come in to take decisions. And
yeah, very different experience of the word lab than they had, I suppose.
So that
no, it's interesting though, because I think it's, demonstrates that you can communicate the science to a expert audience. So it's that's a really cool aspect of the defense.
Yeah,
I would argue that it is actually really quite useful for industry, because very often you have to communicate to people who might know what an experiment is, but that is where their knowledge may end. Very interesting. Yeah, that seems like quite a unique system to me. Like, I am pretty sure nowhere in the UK has this.
I think not even in the entire Switzerland they have this system. So it's in some universities in Switzerland, and I think in Spain they might even have this as well. So,
interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, completely different experience. I mean, I'm just trying. So obviously, so if I think of the UK system, so our vivas are known to be like half a day, maybe even an entire day. I've heard of vivas which are like 6 to 8 hours, where you're genuinely wondering why and how. But mainly why, I suppose. Yeah, it's just no one wants this. Not the committee, not the person being graded, if you will. Like, literally, no one wants this. But in your case, then to have a 10-minute presentation about work that you've been doing for 5 years, how do you even do that?
Practice, I think. Now I'm much better at it, because in the consulting world, it's all about that. So
fair enough. Yeah, let's jump into that. So, what was your first job after the PhD like? Because it must have been quite the switch.
Yes, so I worked at Frontier Economics. It's an economic consultant, a UK one, and they have, 5 companies around Europe, one in Madrid. And the reason I applied to this one is because of the culture that they have. It's a really unique culture, like based on 4 values, which are fun, open, profitable, and transparent, I think.
Nice. Very unlike academia.
Nice. Yeah, and they really have those values, and they also pursue like flexible working even before the pandemic, and they have recharge days. So if you overwork for a week or something, they give you a day for free to recharge, basically. So the company culture felt like really a good place to be in, especially after the stress of academia.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And so I decided to go back to Spain because of these personal problems that I had. And it was like a nice place to be for a while, close to my family. And what was the question?
No, just in general, how was the experience of your job?
So I applied.
Transition.
Yeah, so I applied here to Frontier. It was the only place I applied to, by the way, and I got in. But, this is actually important. At my PhD at the university, it was Lausanne University, they had this career center. And they were offering courses for PhDs and postdoc to transition from academia to the industry.
God damn it. Sorry, I should clarify my reaction. It seems that Lausanne University has realized that loads of people actually do this and has decided to actually help them. Maybe, I'm not entirely sure if anyone from like the UK in a position of power is listening, but maybe UK universities should also look into that. Just
they have them at Nottingham. They have them at Nottingham, Mela, so maybe it's just
Nottingham.
More Warwick. You need to need to be shouting at right now.
I can't specifically shout at Warwick because then I can be done for slander. Anyway, so Lausanne University had the foresight that, or just the consideration that a lot of PhD students and postdocs would still transition into industry. Did you find that very helpful, the courses that they offer? Did you take a lot of them?
Yeah, it was a workshop. So basically they help you write your CV and your letter of motivation. And in particular, this person, I had my job already. I had found like my ideal job. So you actually took your ideal job ad to the workshop. And it was like a 2-day workshop split up with a week in between. And basically she helped you to how to read the ads, like what are the keywords that you have to focus and how to tailor your CV and letter of motivation for that specific ad. I never had done this before, so it was like really an eye-opening experience, like, oh, actually, this is how you read a job ad, and it makes sense. It actually gives you a lot of information if it's well written, of course. And with that, so when you know how to read it and you know what they're asking for, it's much easier to tailor your CV for that ad, basically. And in particular, this person, her name is Verity Elson, and I think she also works for any PhD or postdoc that wants to pay her the fees, in case anyone wants. And she helped me with everything, both writing the CV, both writing the letter of motivation, and I had like 100% success rate, and I definitely attribute most of it to having her by my side. Like I wouldn't have written that letter or CV without her. And now I can write other letters because she gave me the tools to actually know how to read this advertised. Like, yeah, they are the advertisement.
Excellent. We love a good mentor.
Yeah. So that was the main, like, I always, whenever I have a PhD friend finishing like her PhD or his PhD at Lausanne, I always put them in contact with her, like, hey, you have to take this course. It was the best thing I did in my entire PhD, most probably.
Okay. So. Well, there you go. I mean, that's the best marketing for a workshop I've ever heard. We will make sure to find this person. So now that you were at Frontier, you have now, well, when this podcast comes out, you probably will have already been there, but you're now going to work for Allianz. So what was your decision process there?
So the consulting world is like a really specific world, and it's extremely exciting and stimulating because you have different projects, different clients, everything is different, new things all the time coming, and like you never get bored. It's not like if you have a position in, I don't know, a bank and you're always doing the same type of thing. So in that sense, it's really cool to have these different perspectives. And you work in different sectors as well. So it gave me a huge, broad view of what is it there out in the industry. But what I was lacking for me is like you finish the project, and most times that was it with the client. You never saw the implications that it had for the company on their day-to-day life. And coming from a PhD that you're going for depth, that was like something that I was really missing in the consulting world. Although sometimes you have clients and you work with them like often and you repeat and things like that. So in some cases, you actually get to see the implications. And so then this position at Allianz came, which is like to be an internal consultant for Allianz Global. So it had the good thing of both sides, that you were still in the consulting world, and like the idea is that we're going to work with all of the departments of Allianz and with all of the offices of Allianz around the world. So you have this stimulating fact, but at the same time you are working in the company, so you actually get to see the impacts and the day-to-day impacts of the persons who are actually affected by the project. So that was the reason I switched to Allianz. And not only that, also in terms of what industry should I focus on. Doing this consulting and working for different industries, I mean, I realized that the insurance sector is a place where behavioral science can do a lot of work with all of this intertemporal decision making and stuff like that. So I found it like really exciting for behavioral science.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So I'm always interested in this question of how you define success, and I'm wondering what your answer would be to that question. How do you define success, and did it change from the beginning of the PhD to now while you're working in the industry?
I don't know if I ever defined success in any ways, and definitely if I had a definition of success, it changed a lot over time. And maybe that's why I don't like to define success, because if you set goals and in the end those goals, I mean, it's not only about goals, right? Being successful. But I think for me, it's just finding like a peace of mind with what I'm doing and enjoying it. That would be what I feel like peace of mind is. What I feel success is for me. I don't know what.
Yeah.
Do you have a definition of success?
No, that's a good answer. No, I think just, enjoying how you're living your life is success. there are loads of different metrics I think you can look at. I know in academia there are lots of metrics that they prescribe. What a successful academic should look like, and how many publications you should get, and
citations
grants you should get, and citations.
Now that you're saying that, when I was in academia, I did have a success definition, which was publishing papers. But now that I'm in the other side, the career paths are so open, so open, that you can do anything and be anyone, right? So that's a huge relief, at least for me, that you don't have this unique path that you have to achieve, right? It's like anything. You just choose your own path, and finding the direction is the hard part. That's
right.
I think that is an excellent note to end on. You can be anything and anyone, and the hardest part is just to find the direction that you want to actually be on. I think that's an excellent thing to end on. Victoria, I want to thank you for making the time and being very honest about your PhD experience and the journey afterwards. I think it was a great chat. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for contacting me, and I hope it's useful for anyone listening.
I'm sure it is.
Okay, guys, that was our conversation with Victoria. Thank you so much, Victoria, for coming on the podcast and just having a lovely chat about life of a PhD student, and also what the transition is like to go from academia into an industry job. Was super illuminating. Was a great conversation, I thought.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing that struck me most, and also just as people probably have gathered through this conversation, that thing that resonates with me most is just that it hit her hard as well. That suddenly you do your courses and it's all cool because this is what you're used to. And then the courses are no longer there and it's just you and your research and there is no structure.
Yeah.
And you haven't experienced that before, because I think there is very little... Well, there's just really not that much else that compares to that, where you have no structure. There's an ending deadline and good luck. And like she said, there might be structure, there might be invisible hoops that you need to jump through, but most people before they start a PhD or at the start of the PhD just have no idea what they are. And some people even at the end of the PhD have no idea what they are. And it's a really important point to mention that academia is very intransparent. It's very difficult to figure out what is going on and what you should be doing. That's a really valid point.
I wonder how common an experience it is to have sort of expectations of what you'll be doing on the PhD, and for those to be completely shattered as soon as the realization hits you of what you've sort of got into. Because that was my experience too. I didn't really come across any information or anecdotes about what life on the PhD was actually like before I started it. I guess, I always see on Twitter about, people sort of dividing PhD students between those who have academic parents and those who don't, and looking at the difference in, how prepared people are and the expectations, and just, how much of a benefit it is to have peered behind the academic curtain before you've stepped through it yourself. How much that affords you. Yeah, it's phenomenal.
Yeah, which is, very cheekily exactly the motivation for why we started this series and interviewing people who have done a PhD in behavioral science, so that we can provide our audience, and hopefully you're interested, in just a peek of what this is going to be like, and maybe to also just dispel some massive misconceptions. Because if you have a very strong expectation, like Sarah said, of what you're going to be doing, and it turns out not to be true, that is a very shattering experience, and it can be incredibly demotivating, if not damaging, obviously depending on the experience and the expectation. It seems like Victoria has managed her way around this, though. I think it's really important, another thing that she has mentioned, and honestly this cannot be repeated often enough, but just because you are doing a PhD, that doesn't mean that your entire identity is tied up in the PhD. It's the same with the fact that if you become an academic or you move into industry, at the end of the day, this is a job. Don't let anyone tell you this is a a vocation of some sort, like a higher calling. At the end of the day, it is a job. It's great if you enjoy it. It's great if, your passion is even in that job. Our episode with John indicates how important it is to be passionate, but there are some issues with that too. And it's all just good to have that in perspective. Just because you're doing a PhD doesn't mean you are a PhD student, and that is all you'll ever be or all you'll ever do. And if you don't like it, you don't like it. And if it's not for you, it's not for you. Same with academia. If it's not for you, move on. That's fine.
I think it's a great note to end on, a great sentiment. So I think we'll just leave you with that, dear listener. You are not your PhD, even if you're doing one. And that's fine.
Yeah, that is a perfect thing to end on. That's what we're going to end on. There you go. This is some hardcore wisdom. Sarah and Victoria spitting some hardball facts. Guys, as always, we hope you enjoyed this episode. We hope you thought it was entertaining, educational, thought-provoking, maybe even. Ooh. We hope that you have a great week, and we obviously hope to see you again next week.
Yeah, or you won't see us, but you'll hear us, maybe.
Something like that.
Something like that.
You're the dummy that don't believe in science. All your projects always be denying. You're the one alone